Contee.
Hey, man, how you
Great to
doing?
see you.
Good to see you
again.
too.
All right.
Let's get right into it.
Okay.
Welcome to the DMV Download. I'm your host, Luke Garrett, and joining me in DC Police Headquarters is Chief Robert Contee III. Chief, thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you believe January is almost done? I mean, this month has gone by fast.
You are so right about that, man. These days, time seems to move pretty fast, especially after I pass 50. So, yeah, time is moving pretty quickly.
Time is moving fast. And as you know, we enter 2023. Our city did get off to a bit of a violent start, especially for youth. There are a couple cases that we'll talk about, but as we start this year and go into February, what are you thinking about as far as violence in the city?
Yeah, so I'm thinking that we want to see less violence in our city. We want to see less firearms in the hands of people who should not have them. We want to see less children shot. We want to see less people shot. We want to see less carjackings. And anytime someone is victimized in our city, any place in our city, any one event, there's a ripple effect behind that. So we want to see less crime. I'm happy that we ended last year with a reduction in violent crime, a reduction in overall crime, and that's great. But if you happen to be one of those individuals who were a victim of a crime, it's not so great. So
Right.
we want to see less crime in our city.
We all enter the new year kind of hopeful, and sometimes seeing a quick spate of violent crime, especially with youth involved, can be a little bit disheartening. Do you think it's a harbinger for the future? And what is DC Police kind of doing on the ground to really keep that from happening again?
Yeah, so we're deploying our resources. We're working with communities all across our city. I just convened a call with some of our faith-based clergy across the city to just have conversations about current issues, the state of things. We met with our ANC commissioners on last Saturday. The mayor convened a meeting that I was honored to attend, to be there with all of the ANC commissioners just to talk about, what the real data shows, right? So, if you look at D.C. historically, again, going all the way back to 2013, I think was the time frame that we looked at when we had less murders in our city. The difference is, we are seeing far less violent crime, but it doesn't feel that way.
Right.
So addressing the fear of crime and reassuring the public that we are here, that we are focused in on driving crime down, it's really important that we do that. And that's going to take all of our communities, government, everyone involved in that.
And you kind of alluded to this, but as an individual listening, a DC resident, we all want to keep this city safe. What can individuals do? Like we're going to talk about the police department, but everyone plays a role here. What would you recommend for individual DC residents to do?
Yeah, so I think, the first thing is we all have to be in position where we are not tolerating unlawful behavior in our communities. And when we do see unlawful behavior, I think we have a responsibility to notify the police. For example, if there's someone in your community who is stashing a firearm in an abandoned car or in the wheel well of a car or on their persons, and you see that, let's not wait until there's a shooting or someone is shot or an errant round goes through a window and hit an innocent person. Let's not find ourselves in that space when we can report those things proactively. Our police officers took over 3,000 illegal firearms off the streets of the District of Columbia last year.
Right.
That was over 800 more than what we did the previous year. So, those are the things, when those shots are going off, when people are finding themselves victims of crime, those are the things that really scare people. And we need to, focus in on that. Community members can call that type of stuff in. I think parents have a clear role in a lot of the stuff that's going on. What you allow your child to do or not do. Parents, you have to be parents, and that is important. That's an important piece that we don't talk a lot about, but it is very, very, very important. My mother's 4'11", but I tell you, as a kid, I was scared to death of her because she did not play. And I think we have kids sometimes who oftentimes don't even show their parents respect, and that's something that as a community we really have to deal with. I'm not suggesting that the answer to that is law enforcement, but really kind of a whole community approach to addressing some of the issues that we see with our young people who are showing up with trauma, who are showing up with impacts from the pandemic, from being isolated, not connected to services, all of those things. And again, this is not a one-off or where the police, the police can fix this by doing X. These are not the issues that we're seeing right now. It's a whole community approach.
I've been on the news desk a lot this month, and we've gotten a lot of callers from listeners, concerned listeners, after Karon Blake's shooting and killing, after the 6 and 9-year-old were shot after exiting that bus on Metro, and a lot of callers call in speaking to this parental point. They're asking, where does this parental conversation come in? I'm kind of curious about more of your thoughts on that. If you're a parent listening right now, what can you do?
So, I'm a father, and I will tell you this. I mean, if my children are doing something that they should not be doing, I mean, there should be consequences for their actions. I mean, I think that's just a basic principle. If we are not holding our children accountable for their actions, I think that leads to other spaces where they act out or show up and do things and there are no consequences. I think that parents, again, just have to be parents. We cannot get away from that. We cannot have this conversation about violence and have this conversation about what's showing up in our communities without really talking about parents. Now, I'm not the guy who's going to be able to give you the answer in terms of, well, if parents are not doing this, we should lock up all the parents. I'm not suggesting that.
Right.
But I think that is a community issue, a community concern that has to be talked about with, okay, how do we work in this space? How do we work with parents? I had a parent after the ANC meeting on Saturday, essentially pleading with me that she had been pleading with the system to keep her son incarcerated because of some of the things that she knew he was doing in community. She was very upset about it, and the fact that he had been released. A mother is pleading with me, and I'm like, what can I do to help? And one of the things I did, I connected her with someone at the one's office. Said, hey, if you thought your son might be receptive to these types of services, there's a Pathways program. There are other alternatives, and she said that he would be. So my hope is that we're able to get him connected, and that perhaps he's a better human being, or he's a better young man as a result of some intervention. But this is a parent who's pleading out. So my heart really goes out to parents who want to see some accountability for their children, but for whatever reason, the system is not holding young people accountable in all cases.
And, we'll get back to this discussion of youth violence, go to those 2 cases I mentioned. But before we do, back in 2021, DC PD, saw a 25% increase in the number of registered guns that DC residents registered. There was a feeling of fear, and that kind of linked to more registered guns. Do you think that's how do you look at citizens arming themselves in this city? How do you think about that?
Well, I think people have a right to bear arms based upon the Second Amendment and what the law allows for people to do here in the District of Columbia. Certainly, I know people across all spectrums, right, who decide that they want to have a firearm. They want to go through the training, and they want to learn about gun safety, and they want to own a firearm. And to be quite honest with you, those are not the guns that are showing up on crime scenes. Those are not the guns that are being used in most of the crimes. It's not to say that it doesn't happen from time to time. It does.
Right.
But, in large part, these are law-abiding citizens who, because the law allows them to own a firearm, they want to exercise that right. And I have no objection to that. I want people to be responsible gun owners. I want people to understand that there are risks and vulnerabilities there. Most recently, there's a case that I'm thinking of in the last couple of days where a young man stole his mother's registered firearm. And those types of things, they happen from time to time. There are other cases where sometimes young children get a hold of legal firearms, and that makes for a bad situation, with a little finger in that trigger. So there's certainly risk and vulnerabilities there, but I certainly, for people who want to be responsible gun owners, I really don't have any issues with that.
DC saw a 70% increase in carjackings between 2019 and 2021. You've been on the show to talk about carjackings before, just a few months ago. Has anything changed in the attack of this issue? What can individuals do to either protect themselves or be hopeful that the MPD is doing something about it?
So, again, I'm sure this is an issue. So, hey, this is a MPD thing, to fix. It's not a MPD thing to fix. We're going to lock up people who are out here carjacking, but how do we get to those people before they get to the point where they're carjacking, right? Is where everyone else can play a part in that. Some of the people who have been involved in carjackings, and you go back to 2019, that's pre-pandemic, 2020 during the pandemic, 2021 coming out sorta of the pandemic onto 2022, and when we look at where we are right now, a decrease, yes, in robberies and carjackings. But again, if you're that person that got carjacked yesterday, we just charged a young man. I think the report is out early. I mean, like 6 carjackings or 7.
15-year-old, yeah.
I mean, yes, he carjacked, but like, what are the other issues that got this 15-year-old like out carjacking, 6 or 7 people? I mean, that's very disturbing. I think that's the bigger issue, and that's where you will oftentimes hear me talk about accountability, right? What happened like with the first carjacking that he did? And if he has other charges, like some of these kids, sometimes we have to ensure greater accountability. And that means they got to sit down sometimes. And that means that they have to get the services that they need or the programming that they need or the level of supervision or whatever it is that they need so that they're not in community committing other types of violent acts like carjacking.
And that really dovetails right into the revised criminal codes, right? I mean, DC Council just overrode a veto from the mayor on this criminal code. It's a century-old criminal code, and it lowers sentencing for a few violent crimes. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so I've been very public about where I stand on that, and I've said that anytime we're talking about lowering penalties for violent offenders who commit crimes in our city, that's a non-starter for me. I think that you look back at, look, who are the people who weighed in on this and said, hey, look, like the way that we're doing it is problematic, right? You have the U.S. attorney, you have the police chief, you have the mayor, you have both judges from Superior Court and the Court of Appeals weighing in to say, hey, there's some things here that are probably going to, we're going to be in a bad space. It's, we're doing too much too soon. Yes, I agree that the criminal code needs to be reformed. And there are a lot of things that we agree on. Like, what was the problem with focusing on the things that we all agree on, those things that we needed to work on, like lowering penalties, having more conversations with community. I just received 2 letters from community members yesterday who, they're just, one, talking about their support for law enforcement, but just how disgusted they are, at the fact that with all of the discussion around carjackings and all these other, like, why would we even think about signaling to people in the community that's okay, or we take it less serious today? And of course, you have people who argue, well, the penalty is what it is now, and people
right.
are still committing carjackings. Yeah, I get that. But if I'm the person who's getting carjacked, I want whatever the penalty is that's right now, that's what I want, right? It's not, hey, yeah, let's give them the reduced version. Like, I'm victimized, I'm traumatized. I might now have to go out and buy a gun because I feel, in fear of my life or being carjacked again. I mean, the damage that's done to people, the trauma that victims like get exposed to, I don't think that that's given enough weight through my lens, right? Like, I don't believe that it is.
So in other words, it's for the victims. It's for that justice that has to do with the victims, not just the justice for the perpetrator.
Exactly. So if like all of the stuff that's done, through the reform. Well, not everything, but some of the things that we're talking about that are concerning to people. I think you look at that, like how our victim, where's the victim in all of this, right? Who does this actually help? Is the victim being helped, or is it the person who victimized, the person who carjacked, the person who robbed? Like, who
right.
benefits from what it is we're doing right now? And that's the real question. And I think if you go through those things that we're talking about, like, I don't think victims win in that space. And again, that's a non-starter for me.
Right. And I was about to read to you, this piece from the DC Council that says there's no evidence that longer sentences, as enabled by a sentencing enhancement, lead to less crime. But what you're talking about is the justice for the victim, not necessarily the recidivism idea. I'm
talking about justice for the victim, but there's also a report from the U.S. Parole Commission that talks about how we know that gun offenders are the highest on the chart when it comes to the percentage of gun offenders who recidivate, right? I think that's somewhere up in the area about 67% or something like 68%. I was
right
close,
here.
right? Oh, you do have it. Okay. Well, to my point. So, I mean, yeah, we can make these arguments, but let's just talk about the real people. Let's put the statistics aside for a second. You are the guy. You are the guy on whatever street, 5th Street, and somebody comes up to you, put a gun in your face, take your car, take your coat, and then on top of that, maybe they shoot you in the leg. Maybe they hit you in the head with the gun and take off with your car. Like, I can appreciate the trauma that they may have been through. I can appreciate all the bad things that may have happened to them, but some bad stuff just happened to me too. And what is my justice as a victim in all of this stuff that has happened? And okay, well, the justice is, hey, we're going to find a way to put this guy back in community, sooner than he otherwise would be, and that's justice. I just don't see the victim's voice in that, and I'm sorry, I'm sure that people who might differ with my opinion, but I deal with victims every single day, and I can tell you that there are a lot of them that are infuriated by that.
And so, the revised criminal code is now in the hands of Congress and ultimately President Biden. So if all of Congress was here in this little room with us and President Biden, what would you say to them as they're reviewing, and it's in their hands now?
I would say review it through the lens of you being a victim. That's what I would say. And would you be satisfied with the outcome of whatever it is we're changing? Would you be satisfied with the outcome if you were the person on the receiving end of that crime? If your loved one was the person on the receiving end? You will oftentimes hear me say people respond differently depending on their proximity to the pain. And when you're very close to that pain, it feels a whole heck of a lot different than when you are removed from that and you do some analysis and come up with a number or whatever it is that was done. I'm sure there's a lot of focus that went into this, but again, I would just say look at it through the lens of someone who's been victimized.
And moving on to that other case, a 6-year-old and 9-year-old were shot after exiting a bus in Northwest D.C. I think we all remember Mayor Bowser came to the scene and said that an idiot with a gun. That's how she described the suspect. Where are we in that investigation? I know there's arrest in one of the people involved in the fight, but not the shooter. Where does that stand?
So we are continuing to progress that case. We have had some movement on it, but we're not at the point right now where we're ready to close it. One of the persons involved, as you mentioned, was involved in the fight on the bus, also used a knife. That person was arrested. And we're working right now to identify the other people. There are other pieces to this that we have to really make sure are together. As we move forward to try to levy charges against the person. You think about the video that has been out there. I'm asking citizens or people who live in that community, look at that video. I can assure you that the people involved live within close proximity or hang within close proximity of where this incident happened on the bus. I mean, it's tragic, right? I mean, thankfully, these children didn't die, but that could be a different conversation with a bullet to the left or right. That could be a different conversation. So, let's put that passion, all that focus, on the people who did this. And the mayor, when she mentioned, an idiot, that bus was filled with people who had nothing to do with this fight. And somebody thought it was okay to pull a gun and fire it while we have all these innocent people on the bus. And again, that goes back to your criminal code reform, right? Like, okay, so what do we say to those victims in terms of how we view gun crime and what's important to us, right? Like the 6 and 9-year-old, what do we say to them? Like, yeah, this is how serious we take it. We think we should move the penalty from here, kind of down to here. That just does not make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. And I guess call me biased because, I tend to, really look through the lens of the victim. Being born and raised in this city and seeing all that I've seen over the years, sometimes it's personal, your family or not, or just everyday people, man. I really have a heart for people in our city who find themselves being victims of crime, of senseless crime at that. And
I can hear, Chairman Phil Mendelson in my head saying, the data just doesn't show that. But again, I guess that comes back to your point. I don't mean to make you repeat yourself, that it's what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, it's what I'm seeing on the ground. And, there's a lot of people in the media that are out there when I'm out there 2, 3 o'clock in the morning standing over someone's child.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there are a few people that are, who are making some of these decisions that are out there when that's happening. And, when you have the ability to kind of look at things through that lens, again, someone may say, well, Chief, that's not fair. That's not fair to the perpetrators of the crime, because they are entitled to justice. And when they receive sentences in prison and all that kind of stuff, and the justice system, takes its course, okay, now we're saying through this, yeah, well, we want to go back 15 years later or 20 years later and look at that through a different lens now. How has that person been since they've been incarcerated? Hey, did they get in trouble while they were in jail? And if not, they've done 15 or they've done 20 years. Yeah, so maybe they're ready to go back into society. I mean, I don't know. While we're dealing with some of the very important issues that we're seeing in community with violent crime, I just don't think that that's the right approach. I'm sorry, I don't.
Chief Contee, thank you so much for giving us all the time and to let us all kind of pick your brain and hear where you stand on all these issues.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Take care.